when you're designing your robot and any mechanism, you always want to keep it as simple as possible. The more simple it is, the easier, the more reliable it'll be, and also it will also be easier to troubleshoot. The next is tool design first. So when designing a mechanical part, try to design it as most accurately with the most thought put into it, instead of just throwing something together and then trying to fix it with programming later. So this way you have a well-working mechanical part as well as good programming to go along with it. Next is leapfrog development. So when you have a prototype, don't be complacent and satisfied with where it is, but always try to move on and bring it to the next level. Repetitive testing, here on the Cougars, we've never fully have finished a part before we test it 5 times. So that's something that's very important to make sure your piece is reliable and working. And finally, competitive development is put 2 parts and two teams working on something at the same time. So you can always go back and forth and see which one is better and which one you want to pick at the end.
I'd like to add something to leapfrog development. The one really important part of that is you never take apart an old working robot or tool. So it's really important. So what we do, we always make a new version rather than take apart the old one. That way, if it doesn't work or new idea, we have something that we know works well to fall back on. So you can see here, I don't know, hopefully you can see it. These are just
one of them,
yeah, so these are just different versions of it. So this one over here was an original version. And it worked, but it was really simple. You can see it didn't have a whole lot. So we kept it, and then we moved on to this version, which has some braces and supports and stuff. And then we leapfrogged again later in the season, and we moved on to this one, which has weights, and it's the most complex version.
Well, and then the final version was actually this one. It had a servo-actuated lever, so you could lift the 2 rings if you wanted to hang them on the same post at the same time.
So I'm going to ask one audience feedback question. How many of you guys have ever modified a program or a part on your robot and had it make it worse instead of better? How many of you still had the old part to go back and start over with? We always have the old part to go back to.
Okay, so something that our team has used since we were in FLL a little while ago is something called DRR Certified, and it actually stands for Dependable, Repeatable, and Reliable. And all of those basically say that it needs to work well and consistently. So what we try to do is make sure that we test it, like they said, enough times to make sure that we get all the bugs out and make sure that everything works. So that's something that we always try to work for when we're in FTC. And of course, not every single piece is going to be perfect by the time you get it to competition. But we try to.
I want to chime in too. One of the things our team tries to do, two things. One of them is how quickly can it be maintained? Is if something breaks, how long is it going to take to actually replace it? You know, a lot of times you've only got 5 minutes tops between matches in order to get something repaired. The other thing we try to do is we try to break it. We really abuse a tool to make sure that it's going to hold up, whether, you know, mechanically it's going to break down or whether or not it's vulnerable to external threats from another robot. So that's something you got to really keep into consideration.
For us, leapfrog, in terms of that maintenance thing, another advantage is because you have a working copy, if it breaks and you don't have time to fix it, you can always replace it with an older one. So for example, this one, if this broke during a competition, we have a bunch of other versions that aren't the best, not as good as this, but they still work and we can swap it out quickly.
And for tools like that, since it's just on a drawer slide, it's a really quick change, and we usually have two of the latest version at the tournament. That way we can just switch them out.
Your robot will break.